Blood soaked the parched Montana earth where Willa Hayes collapsed, her trembling fingers clutching a letter that had traveled thousands of miles only to deliver heartbreak. The year was 1866, and Bannack, once a booming gold town, was settling into its new role as just another dot on the map of the Montana Territory. The mining rush had slowed, leaving behind those too stubborn, too hopeless, or too attached to move on. The pale sun offered little warmth as Willa read the words again, confirming what she already knew. Her husband, Edward, was dead, killed in a mining accident in California. 3 months pregnant and now widowed at 22, Willa had nowhere to go and no one to turn to in this unforgiving landscape. "Madam, you all right down there?" A deep voice pulled her from the pit of despair. She looked up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the autumn sky. The man dismounted his horse in one fluid motion, his worn leather boots hitting the ground with purpose as he approached. "I'm fine," Willa lied, hastily wiping tears from her dirt-streaked face. The stranger crouched beside her, revealing features weathered by sun and hardship, though his eyes, a startling shade of blue, remained kind beneath the brim of his hat. He couldn't have been more than 28. "You don't look fine," he said simply. "Name's Tucker Neill. I've got a place just north of town. Can I help you up?" Willa hesitated before accepting his outstretched hand. She wobbled as she rose, exhaustion and grief making her unsteady. "Willa Hayes," she managed. "My husband, he's gone." Tucker nodded solemnly, no pity in his expression, just understanding. "I'm sorry to hear that." "I'm carrying another man's child," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Perhaps she needed this stranger to understand the completeness of her predicament, to give him the opportunity to walk away from this weeping, pregnant widow. The cowboy replied without hesitation, "Then I'll love you both." Willa blinked, certain she'd misheard. "I beg your pardon." Tucker looked embarrassed then, as if his words had bypassed his thoughts entirely. "I mean to say I can help you both. My ranch has plenty of room, and I could use some help around the place, just until you figure out your next move." Willa clutched the letter tighter. "I couldn't impose. It's not imposing when it's offered freely," Tucker said. He gestured toward the town's main street, where curious onlookers had begun to gather. "Bannack's a good town, but it's not always kind to women alone." As if to emphasize his point, a group of miners staggered out of the saloon, their laughter carrying on the crisp air. Willa shivered. "Just for a few days," she conceded. "Until I can make arrangements." Tucker nodded, helping her onto his horse before mounting behind her. "Few days it is, then." The ride to Tucker's ranch took them through rolling hills painted in autumn gold and amber. Willa remained silent, her back rigid against Tucker's chest, her mind unable to process the day's events. Edward was gone. Their dreams of a California paradise had died with him, leaving her stranded in Montana with nothing but a half-built future growing inside her. Tucker's place turned out to be a modest but well-kept ranch house with a barn and corral nearby. Chickens scattered as they rode in, and a cattle dog bounded up to greet them, its tail wagging enthusiastically. "Buck, mind your manners," Tucker called to the dog as he helped Willa dismount. "This here's Willa. She'll be staying with us for a spell." The dog cocked its head as if understanding every word, then trotted ahead to the house. "It's not much," Tucker said, suddenly self-conscious, "but it's warm and dry." Inside, the cabin was neat and surprisingly homey. A stone fireplace dominated one wall with a rocking chair placed beside it. A wooden table with 4 chairs sat in what served as a dining area, and a doorway led to what Willa presumed was a bedroom. "You can have the bedroom," Tucker said, reading her thoughts. "I'll bunk in the lean-to out back." "I can't put you out of your own bed," Willa protested. Tucker shrugged. "Won't be the first time I've slept under the stars. The lean-to is plenty comfortable." Before Willa could argue further, a knock sounded at the door. Tucker opened it to reveal an older woman with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes that immediately fixed on Willa. "Mabel Thornton," the woman introduced herself, stepping inside without invitation. "I run the general store in town. Word travels fast around here." She set down a basket covered with a checkered cloth. "Brought some bread and preserves, figured you might need it." Willa felt her cheeks flush. "That's very kind, but no buts," Mabel interrupted. "We look after our own in Bannack." She turned to Tucker. "Though I'm surprised at you bringing home a stranger without so much as a by your leave." Tucker removed his hat, running a hand through his sandy hair. Mrs. Hayes needed help. Seemed the Christian thing to do. Mabel's gaze softened as she took in Willa's condition. "Well, then, you'll be needing more than bread. I'll bring by some of my late daughter's things tomorrow. Should fit you fine as your condition progresses." After Mabel left, an awkward silence fell between them. Willa stood by the table, uncertain of her place in this unfamiliar space. "You must be exhausted," Tucker finally said. "Why don't you rest? I've got chores to tend to, then I'll make us some supper." Alone in Tucker's bedroom, Willa sat on the edge of the surprisingly soft bed and finally allowed herself to truly weep. For Edward, for their lost future, for the child who would never know its father. She cried until no more tears would come, then lay back on the quilt, Edward's letter still clutched in her hand. She woke to the smell of coffee and meat cooking. Night had fallen, and for a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. Then it all came rushing back: Edward's death, the collapse on the street, the kindness of a stranger named Tucker Neill. Willa smoothed her rumpled dress and attempted to tidy her hair before stepping into the main room. Tucker stood at the small stove, his back to her as he tended to a pan of sizzling venison. "Smells good," she said, her voice still rough from crying. Tucker turned, a smile softening his features. "Hope you're hungry. Wasn't sure when you last ate." "Yesterday morning," Willa admitted, taking a seat at the table. Tucker's expression darkened. "That won't do, not in your condition." He served up generous portions of venison steak, potatoes, and green beans, then poured coffee for himself and milk for her. They ate in companionable silence for a while before Tucker spoke again. "I've been thinking," he said carefully. "About your situation." Willa tensed. Here it came the realization that he couldn't possibly house a pregnant widow indefinitely. "I don't know what your plans are," Tucker continued, "but you're welcome to stay here as long as you need. The winter's coming and it's no time to be traveling, especially not in your condition." Willa set down her fork. "That's very generous, but I can't accept." "I'm sure there's a stage that can take me east. I have an aunt in St. Louis who might take me in." Tucker shook his head. "Last stage heading east left yesterday, won't be another until spring thaw now." "There must be some way, not unless you fancy riding horseback through mountain passes in winter, which I wouldn't recommend to anyone, let alone." He gestured vaguely at her midsection. Willa felt trapped. "I can't stay here all winter, it wouldn't be proper." Tucker's lips quirked in a smile. "Proper doesn't keep you warm when the snow's piled high as a man's shoulder. Besides, Bannack's got less than 200 souls left. Everyone already knows you're here. Can't damage a reputation that's already been decided." "And what reputation is that?" Willa asked, bristling. "That you're a widow in need of shelter and I'm a man with room to spare," Tucker said simply. "Nothing more complicated than that." Willa wanted to argue, but exhaustion and practicality won out. "Until spring then, but I insist on earning my keep." "Fair enough," Tucker agreed. "I could use help with the books, never was much good with numbers." That night, as Willa lay in Tucker's bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Montana wilderness, she placed a hand on her still flat stomach and whispered, "We'll be all right, little one." Somehow, we'll be all right. Days turned into weeks as autumn surrendered to winter's first tentative advances. Willa found herself settling into life at the Neill ranch with surprising ease. True to her word, she took over the ranch accounts, discovering that Tucker was doing better than he'd let on. Besides the cattle, he had a stake in a silver mine that was turning a modest but steady profit. Tucker, for his part, proved to be a considerate host, giving Willa space while ensuring she had everything she needed. He worked from sunrise to sunset, returning each evening covered in dust or snow, depending on the day's weather. They would share a meal, talking about the day's events, carefully avoiding any mention of the future that loomed with the coming spring. As November deepened, so did the cold, and with it came the first significant snowfall. Willa woke one morning to find the world transformed into a white wonderland. She stood at the window, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, watching as Tucker trudged through knee-deep snow to feed the livestock. There was something comforting about being snowed in, she realized. For the first time since Edward's death, she felt safe, protected from the harsh realities waiting beyond Tucker's property lines. Here, she could pretend that her life hadn't shattered into unrecognizable pieces. When Tucker returned, stamping snow from his boots, his cheeks and nose red from the cold, Willa handed him a mug of hot coffee. "Looks like we're properly snowbound now," he said, accepting the mug gratefully. "Might be a few days before the path to town is passable." "I've been thinking," Willa said, sitting across from him at the table, "about what happens after the baby comes." Tucker's expression remained carefully neutral. "What are you thinking? My aunt in St. Louis. I haven't seen her in years. She might not even take me in, and if she did." Willa sighed. "She's a good woman, but her house is cold and proper, no place for a child to run and play." "Children need space to grow," Tucker agreed. "I've been going through your books," Willa continued. "You could use a proper housekeeper, someone to cook and clean while you work the ranch. And, well, I'm good with numbers. I could keep managing the accounts." Tucker set down his mug. "Are you offering to stay on as my employee, if you'd have me?" Willa avoided his gaze. "It would be a business arrangement, nothing more. I'd earn my keep and a small wage to save for the future." Tucker was quiet for so long that Willa finally looked up, fearing she'd offended him, but his expression held no offense, only thoughtfulness. "I'd be getting the better end of that deal," he said at last. "But if it's what you want, I won't argue against it." Relief washed over Willa. She had a plan now, something to anchor her in this uncertain future. As December arrived, bringing with it the preparations for Christmas, Willa's pregnancy became more pronounced. Her dresses, even with Mabel's alterations, grew tight across her expanding midsection. The first time the baby kicked strongly enough for her to feel it, she gasped, her hand flying to her stomach. Tucker, who had been reading by the fire, looked up in alarm. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," Willa assured him, smiling despite herself. The baby moved. Something flickered in Tucker's eyes, longing, perhaps, or wistfulness. "May I?" he asked hesitantly, setting aside his book. Willa nodded, and Tucker knelt before her, placing a calloused hand gently on her belly. They waited in silence, the fire crackling in the hearth, until the baby kicked again. Tucker's face lit up with wonder. "Strong little thing," he said softly. "Like its father," Willa replied, then felt a pang of guilt. How often did she think of Edward these days? Less and less, she realized with shame. Tucker must have sensed her discomfort, for he withdrew his hand and returned to his chair. "You never speak of him," he observed. "Your husband." Willa smoothed her dress over her bump. "Edward was a dreamer. Always chasing the next big strike, convinced that fortune was just around the corner." "Is that why you came to Montana?" "No, we were heading to California. Bannack was supposed to be a brief stop." Willa smiled sadly. "Edward heard about a promising claim in the Sierra Nevada. He went ahead while I waited here. The plan was for me to join him once he'd established a home for us." "I'm sorry," Tucker said simply. "The irony is, his letter said he'd finally found the claim that would make us rich. He was killed in a tunnel collapse the very next day." Willa blinked back tears. All those dreams buried with him. Tucker leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees. "What were your dreams, Willa, not Edward's, yours?" The question caught her off guard. "A home," she said after a moment. "Somewhere permanent, with children running around a yard. I grew up moving from place to place. My father was in the army. I always wanted roots. And now," Willa looked around the cozy cabin that had become her refuge. "Now I'm just trying to survive each day." Christmas Eve brought a temporary break in the weather, allowing Tucker to ride into town for supplies. He returned with not only food and necessities, but also small gifts: a silver hairbrush for Willa and a handcrafted wooden horse for the baby. "It's too much," Willa protested when he presented them to her. "It's Christmas," Tucker replied, as if that explained everything. "Besides, I've never had anyone to buy presents for before." Willa had managed to knit Tucker a scarf from yarn Mabel had brought, working on it during the long afternoons while he was out tending to the ranch. When she gave it to him, his eyes grew suspiciously bright. "It's not much," she said apologetically. Tucker wrapped the scarf around his neck. "It's perfect." They shared a special dinner that night: venison roast, potatoes, and the last of the preserved summer vegetables. Tucker had even splurged on a bottle of wine, though he insisted Willa have only a sip for the toast. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass. "And to those we've lost," Willa added softly. As they sat before the fire later, a comfortable silence between them, Willa felt a sense of peace she hadn't known since before Edward's death. She glanced at Tucker, his profile illuminated by the firelight, and felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the baby. It scared her, this growing affection for a man who had been nothing but kind to her. It felt like a betrayal of Edward's memory, yet she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her whenever Tucker smiled, or the way she found herself looking forward to his return each evening. January brought brutal cold and storms that kept them housebound for days at a time. They fell into a routine, Tucker tending to the essential chores and livestock, Willa keeping the house warm and preparing meals. In the evenings, they would read by the fire, or Tucker would tell stories of his years as a ranch hand before buying his own place. "How did you end up in Bannack?" Willa asked one night as they huddled near the fireplace, a blizzard raging outside. Tucker stoked the fire before answering. "Came out west after the war, served with the Union, saw things no man should see. When it was over, I couldn't go back to Pennsylvania, to all those expectations and memories. Your family, parents died while I was fighting, no siblings, nothing to tie me down," he shrugged. "Worked my way west, ranch to ranch. Saved every penny until I had enough for a down payment on this place." "You built all this yourself?" Tucker nodded. "Every nail and board. Took 3 years to get it how I wanted." "It's beautiful," Willa said sincerely. "A real home." Tucker's gaze met hers. "Getting there," he said quietly. As January gave way to February, the snow began to recede, allowing Tucker more time to work outside. He started building something in the barn but refused to tell Willa what it was, insisting it was a surprise. Willa's pregnancy had advanced to the point where simple tasks became challenging. Tucker noticed her struggling one morning to bend down and retrieve a dropped spoon, and immediately took over the kitchen duties. "You should be resting," he insisted, guiding her to the rocking chair. "I'm pregnant, not helpless," Willa protested, though she was secretly grateful to be off her swollen feet. "Humor me," Tucker said, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "My mother lost 3 babies before me. The doctor said it was because she worked too hard." Willa covered one of his hands with her own. "I'm sorry about your mother's losses, but this baby and I are strong. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, most of them while working in fields or tending homes." Tucker squeezed her shoulder. "Still, no need to push yourself when I'm here to help." That evening, as they sat at the table finishing supper, Willa felt a sharp pain that made her gasp. Tucker was immediately at her side. "What is it? The baby?" Willa nodded, unable to speak as another pain gripped her. When it passed, she managed, "I think it might be time." Tucker's face drained of color. "But it's too early." "You said April, babies come when they're ready," Willa said, trying to keep her voice calm despite the fear rising within her. "We need to fetch Mabel. She's helped deliver half the babies in Bannack." Tucker hesitated, clearly torn between the need to get help and not wanting to leave her alone. "Go," Willa urged as another pain began building. "I'll be all right for an hour. The pains are still far apart." Tucker grabbed his coat and hat. "I'll ride like the devil himself is chasing me." After he left, Willa paced the small cabin, timing the contractions as her mother had taught her years ago. They were coming regularly but still spaced about 15 minutes apart. First babies, her mother had said, often took their time. She gathered clean towels and sheets, heated water on the stove, and tried to prepare mentally for what was to come. Edward should be here, she thought, then immediately pictured Tucker's face instead. It was nearly 2 hours before she heard horses approaching. Tucker burst through the door, followed by Mabel, and to Willa's surprise, Dr. Matthews, the town's only physician. "How far apart are the pains?" Mabel demanded, already rolling up her sleeves. About 10 minutes now, Willa said, leaning against the table as another contraction began. Doctor Matthews set down his bag. Let's get you comfortable, Mrs. Hayes. This could be a long night. They moved Willa to the bedroom, where Mabel efficiently prepared the bed for delivery. Tucker hovered anxiously in the doorway until Dr. Matthews gently but firmly asked him to wait outside. I'll call you if we need anything, the doctor promised. Tucker looked at Willa, his expression torn. I'll be right outside the door if you need me. The labor progressed slowly through the night. Willa, exhausted and in pain, found herself calling for Tucker during particularly difficult contractions. He would appear instantly, letting her crush his hand while Mabel wiped her brow with a cool cloth. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the snow-covered landscape in pink and gold, Willa's labor intensified. Dr. Matthews positioned himself at the foot of the bed. It's time to push, Mrs. Hayes, he instructed. With the next pain. Mabel took one of Willa's hands while Tucker, who had refused to leave again, took the other. You can do this, Tucker whispered. You're the strongest person I know. With a cry that seemed to come from the depths of her soul, Willa pushed, feeling as though her body might tear in two. Again and again she pushed, drawing strength from Tucker's unwavering presence and encouraging words. And then, just as the sun fully crested the horizon, a new cry filled the room, the indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. A boy, Doctor Matthews announced, lifting the squalling infant for Willa to see before placing him on her chest. Willa stared in wonder at the tiny, perfect face of her son, Edward's son. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when he briefly opened them, eyes that promised to be as brown as his father's had been. He's beautiful, Tucker said, his voice thick with emotion. Perfect. Mabel bustled around, cleaning up while Dr. Matthews completed his examination of both mother and child. Healthy as horses, the pair of them, the doctor proclaimed. When they were finally alone, Willa cradled her son while Tucker sat on the edge of the bed, his expression one of awe as he watched the infant nurse. What will you call him? Tucker asked softly. Willa had thought about names often during her pregnancy, always assuming she would name a son after Edward. But now, looking at this brand new person who would forge his own path in the world, she hesitated. Samuel, she decided. Samuel Edward Hayes. Sam, Tucker tried the name out. It suits him. Willa looked up at the man who had shown her more kindness than she had any right to expect. Tucker, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. Tucker's eyes met hers, filled with an emotion that made her breath catch. No thanks needed, it's been the best few months of my life having you here. Before Willa could respond, Sam finished nursing and began to fuss. Tucker helped position the baby against her shoulder, his hands sure and gentle. You're good with him, Willa observed as Sam settled. Tucker smiled sheepishly. Had some practice with calves and foals. Not quite the same, I reckon. Close enough, Willa said, returning his smile. The days following Sam's birth passed in a blur of feedings, diaper changes, and precious little sleep. Tucker proved to be an invaluable help, taking the baby in the early mornings so Willa could rest, and handling all the household chores without complaint. Visitors from town began arriving once word spread of the birth. They brought gifts for the baby and meals for the new mother, but Willa noticed the speculative glances exchanged when they saw how comfortable Tucker was with Sam, how naturally they had formed a family unit. Mabel, never one to mince words, cornered Willa during one of her visits when Tucker was out checking the cattle. That man is in love with you, she stated bluntly, nodding toward the door Tucker had just exited through. Willa felt heat rise to her cheeks. He's been kind, that's all. Mabel snorted. I've known Tucker Neill for 5 years, kind as giving a stranger directions, taking in a pregnant widow, helping deliver her baby and looking at her like she hung the moon. That's love, plain and simple. I'm still in mourning, Willa protested weakly. Are you? Mabel fixed her with a penetrating stare. Or are you hiding behind that mourning because you're afraid? Willa looked down at Sam, sleeping peacefully in her arms. Edward was my husband, the father of my child, and he's gone, Mabel said, not unkindly. I buried my Frank 15 years ago. Thought I'd never smile again. Then 2 years later I met Harold. We had 10 good years before pneumonia took him. What are you saying? That the heart has room for more than one love in a lifetime? Mabel patted Willa's hand. Don't waste what's right in front of you because you're honoring a ghost. After Mabel left, Willa sat rocking Sam, her mind churning with conflicting emotions. Did she have feelings for Tucker beyond gratitude? And if she did, what then? As March arrived, bringing with it the first hints of spring, Willa found herself increasingly aware of Tucker's presence. The way he moved, the sound of his voice, the gentle way he handled Sam, all of it affected her in ways she couldn't ignore. One evening, as they sat by the fire with Sam sleeping in the cradle, Tucker had built his surprise project from the barn. Tucker cleared his throat nervously. I've been meaning to ask you something, he began, setting aside the bridle he'd been repairing. Willa's heart quickened. Yes. Now that the weather's improving, I thought. That is, if you'd like. He took a deep breath. Would you and Sam join me in town on Sunday for the church service and perhaps lunch at the hotel afterward? Willa blinked, surprised by the formal invitation after months of living under the same roof. Like an outing together. Tucker's ears turned red. Like a proper outing, yes, with me escorting you and Sam. The implications were clear. This would be a public declaration of sorts, a statement to the town that they were. What? Courting? The thought both thrilled and terrified her. I'd like that, she heard herself say. Tucker's face lit up with a smile that made her heart flip. Good, that's good. Sunday arrived with clear skies and the warmest temperatures they'd seen in months. Willa dressed carefully in her best dress, which Mabel had altered to fit her post-pregnancy figure. She bundled Sam in the blanket Mabel had knitted for him and waited nervously as Tucker hitched the wagon. The drive into Bannack was pleasant, with Tucker pointing out the first signs of spring. A robin here, a patch of exposed grass there, the creeks beginning to flow freely again. Sam slept contentedly in Willa's arms, lulled by the rocking of the wagon. At the small church, heads turned as Tucker helped Willa down from the wagon, then offered his arm to escort her inside. Whispers followed them as they took a seat in a pew near the back, but Tucker seemed unbothered. The service was simple but moving, with Reverend Johnson speaking about renewal and second chances. Willa found herself blinking back tears when he quoted from Isaiah, "Behold, I will do a new thing, now it shall spring forth, shall ye not know it? I will even make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert." Afterward, as they made their way to the hotel for lunch, several townspeople stopped to admire Sam and chat. Willa noticed that everyone addressed them as if they were a family unit. Your boy and your wife, directed at Tucker, who never corrected the assumptions. The hotel dining room was nearly empty when they arrived, allowing them a quiet table by the window. They ordered beef stew and biscuits, with Tucker insisting Willa have a slice of apple pie as well. You need to keep up your strength, he said, watching with obvious pleasure as she enjoyed the rare treat. As they finished their meal, Sam began to fuss. Willa was preparing to take him outside when Tucker surprised her by reaching for the baby. May I? He asked. Willa handed Sam over, watching as Tucker expertly cradled the infant, murmuring softly to him. Sam quieted almost immediately, his tiny hand grasping Tucker's finger. You're a natural, Willa observed. Tucker looked up, his expression serious. Willa, there's something I need to say, her pulse quickened. Yes, these past months, having you and now Sam at the ranch, it's changed everything for me. Tucker's voice was low, meant only for her ears. I know it hasn't been that long since Edward passed, and I don't want to dishonor his memory or your grief, but I can't let you leave come spring without telling you how I feel. Willa held her breath. I love you, Tucker said simply, and I love this little boy as if he were my own. I know it might be too soon, and if it is, I understand, but if there's any chance you might someday feel the same. Tucker, Willa interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. I do feel the same. Hope blazed in Tucker's eyes. You do? Willa reached across the table to take his free hand. I've been fighting it, feeling guilty for moving on so quickly, but the truth is I've fallen in love with you too. Tucker looked as though he might burst with happiness. Will you stay then, not as my housekeeper or bookkeeper, but as my wife? Let me be a father to Sam, raise him as my own." Willa felt tears of joy spring to her eyes. "Yes," she said. "Yes to all of it." They agreed to a short engagement out of respect for Edward's memory, planning a simple ceremony for late April when the wildflowers would be blooming on the hillsides. News of their engagement spread quickly through Bannack, met with general approval and even some comments that it was about time. Mabel, of course, took full credit for the match. "Knew from the moment I saw you two together that this would happen," she declared when they told her. "Just had to let nature take its course." The weeks leading up to the wedding were busy ones. Spring brought calving season, keeping Tucker occupied from dawn until dusk. Willa, meanwhile, had her hands full with Sam, who was growing and becoming more alert by the day. Despite the busyness, they found moments of tenderness, Tucker teaching Willa to ride his gentlest mare, evening walks with Sam bundled against the lingering chill, quiet conversations by the fire after the baby was asleep. During one such evening, as they discussed their future, Tucker brought up a subject Willa had been avoiding. "Have you thought about writing to your aunt in St. Louis, letting her know about Sam and us?" Willa sighed, leaning back in the rocking chair. "I should. She's my only living relative." "Would she come for the wedding, do you think?" "Aunt Harriet doesn't travel well," Willa said, "and she never approved of Edward, said he was too flighty, too focused on dreams instead of practical matters." She smiled ruefully. "She wasn't wrong, and what will she think of me?" Tucker asked, trying to sound casual but unable to hide the hint of concern. Willa studied him, this steady, honest man who had opened his home and heart to her and Sam. "She'll think I've finally come to my senses," she said confidently. The letter was sent the next day, along with one to Edward's parents in Ohio, informing them of their grandson's birth and Willa's upcoming marriage. She didn't expect them to reply. They had never warmed to her, blaming her for encouraging Edward's Western adventures, but she felt they deserved to know. To Willa's surprise, a response came from Aunt Harriet just 2 weeks later, delivered by the first regular stagecoach of the spring. The letter was brief but warm, expressing joy at Sam's birth and cautious approval of Willa's engagement. It also contained a generous bank draft as a wedding gift, with instructions to build something lasting. No response came from Edward's parents. As April unfurled its green promise across the Montana landscape, preparations for the wedding intensified. Mabel organized a group of women to decorate the church with early spring flowers and greenery. Reverend Johnson visited the ranch to discuss the ceremony, bringing with him a bottle of good whiskey to share with the groom-to-be. The night before the wedding, after Sam had been fed and settled in his cradle, Tucker took Willa's hand and led her outside. The air was crisp but not cold, the sky a vast canvas of stars above them. "I have something to show you," he said, guiding her toward the barn. Inside, Tucker lit a lantern and led Willa to the back corner, where a large object stood covered with a tarp. With a flourish, he pulled the covering away to reveal a handcrafted rocking cradle, large enough to serve as a bed for a growing child. "It's beautiful," Willa breathed, running her fingers over the smooth, polished wood. "Made from the same oak as Sam's cradle," Tucker explained. "But this one's for any brothers or sisters that might come along someday." Willa felt her heart swell with love for this man who thought of everything, who planned for a future filled with children and happiness. "There's more," Tucker said, leading her to a workbench where a small wooden plaque lay. It read Neill Family Ranch, with space below for names. "I thought we could hang it by the front door," he explained. "Add names as our family grows." "Our family," Willa repeated, the words filling her with warmth. She traced the lettering with her finger. "It's perfect." Tucker gathered her into his arms. "I never thought I'd have this," he admitted. "A wife, a child, a real family. I keep thinking I'll wake up and it will all have been a dream." Willa rose on tiptoes to kiss him softly. "Not a dream," she assured him, "and tomorrow it becomes official." The wedding day dawned clear and mild, as if nature itself approved of the union. Mabel arrived early to help Willa dress and prepare Sam for his important role. For the occasion, Willa wore a new dress of pale blue silk, a splurge from Aunt Harriet's gift money with her mother's lace shawl, and a crown of spring wildflowers in her hair. The small church was filled to capacity when Mabel escorted Willa down the aisle, Sam nestled in his grandmother's arms. Tucker waited at the altar, his usually weather-worn face clean-shaven and solemn until he caught sight of his bride. Then his expression transformed into one of such pure joy that several women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. The ceremony was simple, but heartfelt. Tucker and Willa exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to honor and cherish each other and to raise Sam with love and guidance. When Reverend Johnson pronounced them husband and wife, Tucker's kiss was gentle but filled with promise. The celebration afterward, held at the hotel, lasted well into the evening. The entire town seemed to have turned out to wish them well. There was dancing and feasting, laughter, and a few happy tears. Even Dr. Matthews, known for his seriousness, was seen tapping his foot to the fiddle music. As the party wound down, Tucker found Willa sitting quietly in a corner watching Sam sleep in an improvised cradle. "Mrs. Neill," he said, sitting beside her. Ready to head home, her new name sent a thrill through her. "Yes," she said, gathering Sam carefully. "Let's go home." The ride back to the ranch was peaceful, the spring night filled with the sounds of awakening nature. Sam slept contentedly in Willa's arms, occasionally making the small sighing sounds that never failed to tug at her heart. As they approached the ranch, Willa gasped. The house was illuminated with lanterns, and on the porch hung the wooden plaque Tucker had shown her the night before, now affixed to the wall beside the door. "Welcome home, Mrs. Neill," Tucker said, helping her down from the wagon. Then, in a move that made her squeal with surprise, he scooped both her and Sam into his arms and carried them across the threshold. Inside, the cabin had been transformed. Fresh flowers adorned the table, and their bed now was made up with new linens that Willa recognized as part of Mabel's wedding gift. Someone, likely Mabel, had also prepared a cold supper and left it covered on the table, along with a bottle of champagne. After settling Sam in his cradle, they shared the meal and a single glass of champagne between them. When they were finished, Tucker took Willa's hands in his. "I meant what I said in my vows," he told her. "I will love you and Sam until my dying day. And I'll spend every moment trying to make you both happy." Willa's eyes filled with tears of happiness. "You already do," she assured him, "every day." Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their room, Sam sleeping peacefully nearby, Willa reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the depths of grief on a dusty Bannock street to this moment of perfect contentment, it had been a path she could never have imagined. "What are you thinking about?" Tucker whispered, his arms around her. "How sometimes the worst day of your life can lead to the best," she replied. "If I hadn't collapsed on that street." Tucker tightened his embrace. "I believe some things are meant to be. I'd have found you somehow, somewhere." Willa smiled in the darkness. "My romantic cowboy, your cowboy," he agreed. "Always." The years that followed brought the Neill family both joy and challenges. Their first spring as a married couple was marked by a profitable cattle drive and Sam's first steps, which he took on the porch, toddling determinedly toward Tucker as he returned from the fields. By summer, Willa discovered she was expecting again, news that sent Tucker whooping with joy around the yard, much to Sam's delighted giggles. Their daughter, Elizabeth Mabel Neill, was born the following February during a fierce snowstorm that kept Dr. Matthews from attending. Tucker, with Mabel's guidance, delivered his daughter himself, cutting the cord with trembling hands before placing the squalling infant on Willa's chest. "She's got your spirit," he declared as the newborn's cries filled the cabin. Strong and determined, as the children grew, so did the ranch. Using the remainder of Aunt Harriet's gift and the profits from the silver mine, they expanded the house, adding 2 bedrooms and a proper kitchen. Tucker built a schoolroom off the main living area, where Willa taught the children their letters and numbers. Sam, with his dark hair and serious eyes, grew into a thoughtful boy who loved books and animals in equal measure. He called Tucker Pa without hesitation, the bond between them as natural as if it had been forged by blood. Elizabeth, or Libby as they called her, was her father's shadow, following him around the ranch from the moment she could walk, her blonde curls bouncing as she tried to keep up with his long strides. Tucker fashioned a special saddle that allowed her to ride with him when he checked the herd, her delighted laughter carrying across the hills. 2 years after Libby's birth, twin boys joined the family, James Tucker and William Edward Neill. The household became a whirlwind of activity, with 4 children under the age of 5 keeping both parents constantly on their toes. Bannack, meanwhile, continued its slow decline as other towns in the territory grew. By 1872, it had lost its status as the territorial capital to Virginia City, and many businesses closed or relocated. But the Neill Ranch thrived, with Tucker's careful management and Willa's sharp business sense combining to build a respectable operation. They remained close with Mabel, who became grandma to all 4 children despite the lack of blood relation. She spent most holidays at the ranch, her sharp tongue mellowed by the passage of time and the affection of the children who adored her stories of the early days. As the children grew old enough to help with the ranch work, Tucker and Willa found more time for each other. They established a tradition of Sunday afternoon rides, just the 2 of them, exploring the changing landscape of their property through the seasons. During one such ride, on their 10th wedding anniversary, Tucker led Willa to a hilltop overlooking the valley. Below them, the ranch spread out the expanded house, the new barn, the corrals and outbuildings, all testament to the life they had built together. "Did you ever imagine this?" Tucker asked, gesturing to the scene below. "That day when I found you on the street," Willa shook her head. "Never. I thought my life was over. And instead, it was just beginning." She smiled at the man who had become everything to her husband, father to her children, partner in all things. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Sam, now 11, approached them with an unusually serious expression. "Pa," he said, addressing Tucker. "Jimmy Watson at school says you're not my real pa. He says my real pa died before I was born." Tucker and Willa exchanged a glance. They had always been honest with Sam about his birth father, showing him the few photographs Willa had of Edward and telling him stories, but he had been too young to fully understand. Tucker patted the space between him and Willa. "Come sit, son." Sam climbed onto the bench, his lanky frame still boyish but showing signs of the man he would become. "Your ma was married before to a man named Edward Hayes," Tucker began. "He was your birth father and he died before you were born, that's true? So you're not my real pa." Sam's voice trembled slightly. Tucker put his arm around the boy's shoulders. "Being a father isn't just about whose blood runs in your veins. It's about who teaches you to ride and fish, who reads you stories at night, who loves you and your ma more than anything in the world." "Your pa has been there for every important moment of your life," Willa added. "He's your real father in all the ways that matter." Sam considered this, his young face thoughtful. "But the Hayes part, that was my first pa's name?" "Yes," Willa confirmed. "You were born Samuel Edward Hayes." "But now I'm a Neill, like Libby and the twins," Tucker nodded. "We had your name legally changed when you were 3. Judge Carrington made it official. You've been Samuel Edward Neill ever since." Sam was quiet for a long moment. I think I'd like to know more about him. My first pa." "Of course," Willa said, running a hand over her son's dark hair so like Edward's. "We can look at the photographs tonight and I'll tell you how he and I met." Later, after the younger children were asleep, Willa sat with Sam in the schoolroom, a small wooden box open between them. Inside were her few mementos of Edward, a pocket watch, some letters, and several daguerreotypes showing a handsome young man with Sam's dark eyes and serious expression. "Your father was a dreamer," Willa told him, echoing the words she had once spoken to Tucker. "He believed that something wonderful was always waiting just around the corner." "Was he brave?" Sam asked, studying the images intently. "Very brave," Willa assured him. "And smart, like you. He could recite poetry from memory and knew all about stars and constellations." "Do you think he would have liked me?" Willa felt her throat tighten. He would have adored you, Sam. He was so excited when he learned we were expecting you. His last letter was all about the plans he had for teaching you to pan for gold and identify different types of ore. Sam picked up the pocket watch, turning it over in his hands. Can I keep this, to remember him by? Of course you can, Willa said. It belongs to you. From the doorway, Tucker watched this exchange, his heart full. When Sam finally headed to bed, the pocket watch carefully tucked into his nightstand drawer, Tucker entered the schoolroom and wrapped his arms around Willa from behind. You did good, he murmured against her hair. Willa leaned back into his embrace. We both did. As they prepared for bed that night, Tucker paused in the act of unbuttoning his shirt. I've been thinking, he said hesitantly, about Edward's parents. Willa looked up in surprise. She hadn't heard from the Hayes family since before Sam's birth, their silence a clear indication of their feelings about her. What about them? She asked. Sam's getting older, starting to ask questions. Tucker sat on the edge of the bed. They're his grandparents, his connection to Edward. Maybe it's time to reach out again. Willa joined him, taking his hand. After all this time, I doubt they'd respond. Maybe, maybe not, but Sam deserves the chance to know his father's family if they're willing. Willa marveled at this man's generosity of spirit. Many husbands would feel threatened by connections to their wife's first husband, especially when it came to a child they had raised as their own. But not Tucker. He had always honored Edward's memory, never trying to replace him, but instead creating his own place in Sam's heart. I'll write to them, she agreed, for Sam's sake. The letter, carefully composed and rewritten several times, was sent the following week. Willa kept her expectations low, remembering the cool reception she had received from the Hayes family during her brief marriage to their son. To her astonishment, a reply came less than a month later. Edward's mother, Elizabeth Hayes, wrote that she and her husband had regretted their silence over the years, but pride had kept them from reaching out. The news that their grandson was asking about his father had broken through that pride. Included with the letter was a package containing family photographs, several books that had been Edward's favorites as a boy, and a small leather pouch of gold nuggets, Edward's first successful panning expedition, which he had sent home to his parents for safekeeping. For Samuel, the note attached to the pouch read, his father's legacy. The correspondence opened a door that Willa had thought permanently closed. Over the next year, letters flew back and forth between Montana and Ohio. The Hayes expressed interest in meeting their grandson, an idea that both excited and terrified Sam. What if they don't like me? He confided to Tucker as they repaired a fence line together, the boy now tall enough to hold the post steady while his father secured it. Tucker straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. Not possible, he said firmly. You're the spitting image of their son, smart as a whip and polite to boot. They'll be proud as punch. The meeting finally occurred the summer Sam turned 13, when the Hayes traveled west for the first time in their lives to visit the ranch. They arrived via stagecoach, an elderly couple dressed in formal Eastern attire that looked out of place in the Montana sunshine. Sam, initially shy, came forward at Tucker's gentle nudging. Hello, sir, madam, I'm Samuel Edward Neill. Welcome to our ranch. Mrs. Hayes burst into tears at the sight of him, reaching out trembling hands to touch his face. You look just like him, she said, just like our Edward. The visit, planned for a week, stretched to a month as the Hayes found themselves embraced by the Neill family. Mr. Hayes, a retired banker, spent hours with Sam discussing business and investments. Mrs. Hayes taught Libby to embroider and spoiled the twins with stories and sweets. Most surprisingly, they formed a genuine friendship with Tucker, bonding over their shared love for Sam and their admiration for the ranch he had built. Edward chose well for our grandson's father, Mrs. Hayes told Willa one evening as they watched Tucker teaching Sam the finer points of lassoing in the yard. Better than we could have hoped. When it was time for the Hayes to return to Ohio, promises were made for future visits, and Sam was invited to spend a summer with them once he turned 16. The connection had been established, another thread woven into the tapestry of their family life. As the years continued to pass, the Neill Ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful operations in the territory. The children grew, each finding their own path. Sam, at 18, decided to attend college in St. Louis, staying with Aunt Harriet during term time and returning to the ranch for summers and holidays. His interest in geology and mining, perhaps inherited from Edward, led him to studies that would eventually take him around the world. Libby, fiercely independent and as skilled with horses as any man, declared her intention to run the ranch alongside her father, learning every aspect of the business with determined enthusiasm. The twins, different as night and day despite their identical appearance, found their own niches. James as the family mechanic, fascinated by the new machines appearing in the territory, and William as the artistic one, capturing the beauty of Montana in sketches and watercolors that began to attract attention beyond Bannack. Through it all, Tucker and Willa's love remained the family's foundation. They weathered the difficult times, droughts, harsh winters, the twins' scarlet fever scare with the same strength and unity that had seen them through their early days together. On their 20th wedding anniversary, with all 4 children home for the celebration, Tucker surprised Willa with a gift that left her speechless: the deed to a small cottage on a nearby lake, a peaceful retreat just for the 2 of them. For when the house gets too quiet, he explained. Once all the children have flown the nest, Willa, surrounded by the family they had built together, looked at this man who had claimed her heart so many years ago on a dusty Bannack street. "I can't imagine it ever being too quiet," she said. "Not with the grandchildren we're bound to have someday," Tucker laughed, pulling her close. "Always thinking ahead, aren't you?" "Someone taught me the value of planning for the future," she replied, resting her head on his shoulder as they watched their children tease and laugh with one another around the anniversary cake. That night, as the celebration wound down and the family gathered on the porch to watch a summer thunderstorm roll across the valley, Sam raised his glass in a toast. "To Ma and Pa," he said, his voice deep now, a man's voice, "who taught us that love isn't about where you come from, but where you decide to go together." Willa felt Tucker's arm tighten around her waist as they acknowledged the toast. 20 years ago, she had collapsed on a street, believing her life was over. Instead, she had found a love that encompassed not just her, but the child she carried, a love that had grown to include the family they had created together. "I'm carrying another man's child," she had said that day, broken and afraid. "Then I'll love you both," Tucker had replied, a promise he had kept in ways neither of them could have imagined. And in the years that followed, as grandchildren came along, and the family name spread across Montana territory, that promise remained at the heart of the Neill legacy, a testament to the fact that sometimes love's greatest gifts come from its most unexpected beginnings.